Hey there, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to look now at macronutrients and their functions. So you'll recall that we have three major macronutrients: carbohydrates, protein, and fats. And these each have a different role in our body. So generally speaking, carbohydrates are from the ground. So things that are grown in the ground or in the earth or on the earth, and then are either kept in their natural form or transferred and processed into different foods. So you'll see in this category things like grains, rice, potatoes and sweet potatoes. All of our vegetables and fruits fall into this category. You'll also see things like beans, lentils, peas, and some grains. You can see they're in the middle here between carbs and protein because those foods also have a decent amount of protein. The other things you'll find in our carbohydrate category are lots of our packaged and processed foods. Things like crackers, cookies, chips, pizzas, cakes, etc. You would find an overlap between carbs and fats with many of those packaged and processed foods, having both carbohydrates and fats to a high degree. Our protein foods are going to be things like our typically animal products and some plant products. So things like meat, chicken, fish and other seafood, dairy products. You'll also see some overlap between proteins and fats in things like eggs, some fish like salmon, nuts and seeds, richer or fattier meats, and richer dairy that has the fat still in it. And then, like I said, you'll see some overlap in our protein and carbs in the foods already mentioned. Lastly, we have our fats. These can be plant or animal-based. So our animal-based ones are going to be the ones that have some protein as well. So like our fattier meats, fish, eggs, and dairy. And then you'll see plant-based things like nuts and seeds, avocados, olives, olive oil, and the oil is made from nuts, seeds, and fruits. And then things like butter, peanut butter, almond butter, things like that. So again, that gives you a brief overview of which foods fall into which category before we talk about what these foods do and some important things to know for health. So this is kind of a big chart here. We're going to break this down further in further slides, so you don't need to get too overwhelmed. So brief things to know here is that carbohydrates should take up about 45 to 65% of your total daily calories. So roughly half of your total daily calorie intake, according to the US dietary guidelines, should come from carbohydrates. There are other ideas or other sources that suggest that they don't have to be as high for all individuals, but these are the USDA guidelines. So generally speaking, the more active you are, the more carbohydrates you're going to want, and the less active you are, the less carbohydrates you're going to need. Mostly, you want these carbohydrates to be coming from less processed foods. Things like whole grain breads or tortillas, things like sweet potatoes, fruits, vegetables, and other grains like oatmeal. You don't want as many of these foods to be coming from packaged or processed or simple carbohydrates, things like crackers, cookies, processed breads like white breads or pasta. You'll see why as we go through this, but these are going to have a stronger impact on your blood sugar and retain fewer of their nutrients. The primary roles that carbohydrates have in your body are as an energy source. If you think back to our ATP and energy system discussion last week, you'll recall that both your anaerobic glycolytic and your aerobic respiration systems can use carbohydrates for fuel. So they're a good energy source for activity. They're also a good energy source for your brain. So your brain's primary fuel source is glucose, which is the molecule that all of your carbohydrates are broken down into. Carbs also contain an abundance of fiber, vitamins, and minerals, which are referred to as micronutrients when you eat them in their natural forms, so primarily fruits and vegetables. And when we look at our plate methods next week, you'll see that most leading health guidelines, next lecture, most leading health guidelines recommend that half of your plate, so generally half of the food that you eat in a day, comes from vegetables and fruit. And that's where you're going to get the vitamins and minerals, the things known as micronutrients. So think things like vitamin A, vitamin C, the B vitamins, iron, magnesium, calcium, all these vitamins and minerals, these are incredibly important for your health, function, and weight management, but they don't contain calories like your macronutrients do. We're going to cover the things to know as we move forward. Now, protein is another essential nutrient. This one has a pretty wide range from anywhere from 10 to 35% of your total daily calories. So a tenth to a third of what you're eating. That's a big range. When you look at most of your plate models, protein takes up about a quarter of the plate. So if you're envisioning eating a plate, you have fruits and vegetables and some sort of carb sources on half, and then a portion in a corner of protein. Like we mentioned, protein comes from animals and plants, and it has so many important roles in the body. It builds all bodily tissue. So it has a part in building muscle, bone, connective tissue, skin, endothelial tissue. It helps transport substances throughout the body. So last week when we talked about the protein hemoglobin, that's an oxygen carrier that brings oxygen from your lungs to your muscle cells. It helps form hormones and neurotransmitters, which are kind of like brain hormones. These are the things that can make you feel good, like dopamine and serotonin. That's why getting enough protein is so important, and one way that nutrition can impact your mental health. And it also forms things like enzymes that catalyze or speed up chemical reactions, allowing your metabolism to function properly. Enough protein is also essential for immune health. And if you're exercising regularly or you're looking to build muscle, protein is so crucial for repair and recovery from your exercise sessions, building or repairing muscle tissue, and it can also help keep you full. So one strategy that people often use, and one of the most research-backed strategies for weight management, is getting enough protein throughout the day, especially starting first thing in the morning. So that means including something like eggs or peanut butter or yogurt or some other protein source in your breakfast. That's one key nutrition strategy that can help you manage your weight and your health long term. Let's look at fats now. Fats take up a little bit more to about the same as protein, so 20 to 35%. You need a baseline 20% or about a fifth of the calories that you're eating in a day to come from fat for normal health and hormone function. And again, our fats come from plants and animals as well. Things like nuts, seeds, some of our fruits like avocados, the oils made from those foods, and then from animals as well in the form of eggs, dairy, and animal products like meat. Fat has a ton of roles in your body as well. It can also be an energy source like carbohydrate, but it only acts in our aerobic energy system, so our low intensity, long duration energy system. And at rest, or when you're not doing exercise, you burn about half fat, half carbs. This can also be a good, long, sustainable energy source. So fat is not broken down and digested as quickly as carbohydrates are. So if you know you're going to need energy for a long time, let's say you have a long work shift coming up, making sure you incorporate some fat in your meal beforehand can help. It also helps satiate you or keep you full longer, which can be a great strategy for weight management over time. Even though, as we talked about, fats have extra calories. That's okay. Let's say you're eating a whole piece of bread, is going to be about 100 calories on average, give or take, and a small tablespoon of peanut butter will also be 100 calories. So you might think, oof, I'm not going to eat this small amount of food for the same amount of calories. However, it's going to pack a strong nutritional buck in that it's going to keep you satisfied and full longer and help balance your blood sugar. It also helps with hormone production and function. So lots of your hormones have fat as a precursor, and hormones kind of control everything in our body. So it's important that we're getting enough to produce those. You need fat to absorb some of your vitamins, your fat-soluble vitamins, and fats build up the structure of your cell walls. So again, lots of important functions for fat. And you'll see as we've gone through each of these macronutrients that each has an important role in the body. And when you look at or you hear about some common diets, which we'll talk about in our next lecture, you might see the idea to cut one of these food groups out. But that's generally not a great idea for most people most of the time, unless your doctor or dietitian has suggested otherwise based on a specific condition for you. Generally speaking, all of these are important. They have vital roles in the body, and you want to consume all of them to some amount. Let's say you enjoy consuming more fats and fewer carbs and moderate protein. That's okay. Let's say you enjoy consuming more healthy carbs and fewer fats. That's okay too. As long as you're following some of our other guidelines, like getting a mix of these at all meals and most snacks, making half of your plate fruits and vegetables, and then choosing more nutritious food sources, like those that are less processed and packaged, you'll be pretty much good to go. We'll talk about more of those strategies as we move forward. Okay, so let's look at some specific carbohydrate concepts that are important to know. Complex versus simple carbohydrates. So a complex carbohydrate has a branched chain structure of carbohydrate molecules, which simply means that it takes your body longer to break it down and digest it. These carbs typically include more fiber as well, and these are going to be found in things like vegetables, tubers like potatoes and sweet potatoes, real whole grain products, small amounts in nuts and seeds, and to some extent in fruit as well. Fruit also contains a lot of simple carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are going to be found in things like honey, juices, soda, white packaged processed food like breads and pasta, candy, and any sweet or dessert foods. And these are single or double carbohydrate molecule structures that don't take your body very long to break down and digest. So why is that important? Well, for a couple of reasons. Like I said, the complex carbohydrates are typically going to have more fiber. You can see our fiber benefits up top here. You have two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble, and both play important roles in your body, helping regulate your cholesterol levels, your blood sugar levels, and your digestion, particularly excretion, helping you go to the bathroom regularly. All of these things are super important for your health. Fiber also helps keep you full longer. So if you did an experiment where you had 2 pieces of whole grain bread by itself, and then on another day, you had a cup of orange juice, equivalent in calories and carbohydrates, you would likely find that you were hungrier a lot sooner from the juice because your body can digest and absorb those simple carbohydrates much more quickly. Or if you've ever eaten a huge bowl of spaghetti or a big breakfast of cereal with skim milk and a glass of juice, you might notice that you're hungry again pretty soon. And that's because those simple carbohydrates lack fiber and don't keep you full for as long. They're typically higher in sugar as well. Your complex carbohydrate foods are also going to be more similar to their state found in nature. So they're going to involve higher levels of vitamins and minerals, or micronutrients, which we know are essential for proper function. You will notice a difference if you incorporate more vegetables and fruits into your diet. That's probably my single biggest health tip, is to add vegetables in to most meals throughout the day, or rather my single biggest nutritional health tip. You'll probably notice that even though it doesn't add a big difference in terms of calories, it adds a big difference in terms of the way that you feel because you're getting enough micronutrients. And then lastly, complex versus simple carbohydrates have different impacts on your blood sugar. So when you eat carbohydrates, your sugars in your blood rise. So those carbohydrates are all broken down into sugar, whether they're complex or simple. They get poured out into your bloodstream, and then your body either uses them to create ATP or stores them away in your liver, your muscle tissue, or your fat tissues. Now, your body likes to maintain a pretty narrow carbohydrate range most of the time, where it has just enough but not too much. Your body's sort of like Goldilocks in that way. And when you eat simple carbohydrates, typically you're getting too much. Your body's not super cool with that. So it's going to increase a hormone known as insulin to help quickly store those carbohydrates away. This can create this yo-yo cycling of high blood sugar and low blood sugar, which will lead to you feeling really hungry again soon. So this doesn't stabilize your blood sugar, eating a lot of simple carbs. It doesn't stabilize your appetite. It'll make you hungrier again quickly, reach for less nutritious foods that are going to provide you quick energy again, aka simple carbohydrates. And then you have lots of blood glucose being transferred to adipose or fat cells to be stored in your adipose tissue if you have nowhere else to store them. So again, it's not to say that you can't ever have simple carbohydrates. I like to have a good dessert regularly too, but it's just to say that whenever you can, you want your carbohydrate sources to be coming from whole grain foods, vegetables, fruits, and tubers like potatoes and sweet potatoes. So things that are really from the earth. It's a good strategy. Another strategy to think about is that you want to know you're eating your sugar when you eat your sugar. So if you're going to have a dessert, you know that there's sugar in it. You're not kidding yourself. What you don't want to be happening is to be eating a lot of carbohydrate foods throughout the day that are sneaking in these simple carbohydrates with a lot of sugar in them. So where are some places you might find these sneaky carbohydrates? Well, you would find them in places like Starbucks drinks. So everybody probably knows soda has a lot of sugar, about 50 grams. You wouldn't necessarily think that you'd find it in a latte, but you would. These naked juices that are touted as healthy are chock full of sugar. The normal size of this green naked juice, I think, has about 48 or 50 grams of sugar, which is a lot. It's a similar amount and actually slightly more than what you'd find in a can of Coke, which is the equivalent of about 10 full teaspoons. Think about picking up a spoonful of sugar, pouring that into a cup, and slamming that down. It's dissolved into the liquid, so it's not as hard to choke down, but that's really a lot of sugar. That adds up, if you had one can of Coke every day, to about half of this container of sugar right here. You'll also find sugar hiding in places like yogurt, which is often thought of as a healthy food. If it's a regular yogurt that's flavored, typically it has a lot of sugar. You can search for Greek yogurts, which typically have lower carbohydrate contents or sugar contents and higher protein contents, or unflavored yogurts and flavor them by adding berries yourself. A lot of packaged meals like breakfast sandwiches or packaged freezer lunches and dinners are full of hidden sugars. Lots of salad dressings and sauces are also full of hidden sugars. And then things like granola bars and packaged snack foods are full of hidden sugars. So again, I'm not saying that you should cut out sugar for the rest of your life. That's totally unrealistic and sounds not very fun. But you want to know that you're eating sugar when you're eating it and really fully enjoy it. So aim to find options for foods that you eat throughout the day that are closer to the things found in nature when you're getting your carbs. Again, grains like oatmeal or whole grain bread or whole grain pastas or tortillas, potatoes and sweet potatoes and squash, fruits like berries, bananas, apples, peaches, etc., and vegetables like broccoli, carrots, peas, eggplant, all of them. Pick whatever you like. It doesn't matter which. Pick whatever you like and fill those into your day, and you'll find that you have a lot more stable blood sugar, energy, hunger, and feel better overall. Okay, protein concepts. So an important thing to know about protein is the idea of complete versus incomplete proteins. Again, we know that protein is an essential nutrient that helps build all of our body's tissues, works with our immune system, works as a catalyst for many reactions in the body, helps us feel full, and helps rebuild and repair tissues, including muscle tissue. Complete proteins are those that are high in all of our essential amino acids. So proteins are broken down into little building blocks called amino acids. Think like a bunch of little Legos building a Lego structure. The structure is a protein and the individual Legos are an amino acid. There are some that your body can't make on its own. The rest your body can make from other compounds. There's some that you have to take in. And a food that has all of those essential ones that you have to take in is considered a complete protein. The only foods that are complete proteins are animal products and soy. So that would be meat, chicken, fish, eggs, dairy, and soy foods like tofu, tempeh, edamame beans, or foods made from those. Incomplete proteins are those protein foods that are low in one or more of your essential amino acids. So one of those amino acids that your body can't make, the plant proteins which are incomplete, are going to be low in one or more of those. So as I just mentioned, incomplete proteins are plant-based proteins. So beans, rice, nuts, legumes, vegetables, and seeds will have less protein than our animal foods, but they'll still have some, and they'll be low in one or more essential amino acids. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't consume these foods. You get a ton of other benefits from these foods, and there's certainly an environmental case to be made for eating less animal foods. That just means that you need to get a variety of proteins in throughout your day. So different beans, different kinds of grains, different kinds of nuts and nut butters, and a variety of vegetables to make sure you get all of those essential amino acids. Let's look lastly at some different types of fats. So you have a couple primary types of fats found in nature, and then some that are manufactured. So you've probably heard of saturated, unsaturated, and trans fats. And these terms are based on how a fat behaves at room temperature, what form that it's in. So generally speaking, our unsaturated fat molecules are liquid or softer at room temperature. So think things like olive oil. And then the fats that are found in nuts and seeds, the oily fats that are found in fishes or avocados. So while those foods are whole, they're generally kind of softer and more pliable, with the exception of nuts and seeds, of course. Most of your unsaturated fats come from plant foods, with the exception of fish. Saturated fats are those fats that are solid at room temperature. And these come from things like butter, full fat dairy, meats, and animal products. Trans fats are those that exist only in very small amounts in nature and are usually manufactured in a lab. We'll get to those next. So for a long time, it was thought that saturated fat was really bad. It would cause cardiovascular disease and make you fat and wasn't good for your health. More recent research shows that it's not necessarily the saturated fat that's bad, but it's the pattern of diet that people who eat lots of saturated fat are consuming that's not nutritious. So let's say you're eating a hamburger. Well, what do you usually have with a hamburger? A bun, white processed food bun, ketchup, which has some sugar in it, French fries, which are fried in oil, and potatoes, right? Maybe a milkshake. So you're getting a lot of other refined carbohydrates and higher sugar foods along with this. And that pattern of eating is not as nutritious. More recent research shows that having some saturated fats in your less processed meats, so regular cuts of meat that aren't turned into things like hot dogs or other cured meats or paired with the French fries and a milkshake, are for most people not too problematic for their health when eaten in a wide and varied diet that also contains a lot of plant foods and unsaturated fats. So that goes to say that you can't never have something like red meat or butter. You just want to balance it out with other fats in your diet. And those other fats are the plant fats, your unsaturated fats. These are protective for heart health and blood vessel health. So again, things like nuts, seeds, avocados, olive oils, and fish can be helpful for your health. These will improve things like your HDL cholesterol, your healthy cholesterol, and help do all of the functions that we talked about fats performing in your body while helping balance out your cholesterol levels. Again, saturated fats are okay. You just want to eat them in moderation in your diet with other types of fats and not eat them in the pattern of eating a bunch of junk, processed, or fast food. Now, trans fats are really interesting. So in the late 1900s, when researchers were thinking that saturated fat was not so good for our health, they thought, well, let's just take unsaturated fat, but make it seem more like that solid, dense, saturated fat that we love. So they took unsaturated fat, they hydrolyzed it to add hydrogen atoms and make it thicker, and made something known as trans fat. Now, trans fat was found in a lot of packaged and processed foods. It's now mostly minimized in those foods, but not totally. And actually, foods that have 0.5 grams per serving or less don't have to list the trans fat on them at all. So if you see the words partially hydrogenized on a food label, you know there's some trans fat in those foods. And these fats are bad for your health. So these will increase the clogging of your arteries, increase the plaque in your arteries, a process known as atherosclerosis, which can lead to the development of things like high cholesterol, high blood sugar, can be related to diabetes, and then events like stroke, cardiovascular disease, etc. So trans fats are something you want to minimize in your diet. They are found in small amounts in natural foods, but they're primarily found in our heavily processed and fast foods. Lastly, let's talk about two specific types of fatty acids that are essential in your diet, omega-3s and omega-6s. These are two types of unsaturated fatty acids. And to make this real straightforward, omega-3 fatty acids have an anti-inflammation effect in the body. They reduce levels of inflammation. Omega-6 fatty acids increase levels of inflammation in the body. So why is that important? Well, inflammation in an acute sense is really useful. If you sprain your ankle or you get sick, you want an inflammatory response where your body protects that area and brings extra nutrients for recovery. In a chronic sense, inflammation is the primary underlying factor of all of our chronic diseases and conditions. We'll learn more about that at the end of this class. We don't want unchecked chronic levels of inflammation. And we find that if you look at the standard American diet, we have way higher levels of omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3s. These are found in seed oils like sunflower, safflower, seed oil, sesame oil. These oils are used heavily in packaged and processed foods. They're also found in high amounts in grains and seeds, which are used to feed a lot of the animals that we eat. So then they're found in higher amounts in meats. You'll find omega-3 fatty acids in nuts like walnuts, in fish, especially smaller fish, in olive oils, in omega-3 rich eggs and meats. So animals that eat grasses tend to have higher levels of omega-3s because grass and seaweed are omega-3 rich foods. I don't recommend you going and grabbing a handful of grass from outside to get your omega-3 levels up. But generally speaking, as a whole in the United States, we want to aim to bump up our level of omega-3s and bump down our level of omega-6s to improve our health and reduce our risk of developing chronic disease. So again, that looks like eating foods that are found in forms closer to nature. So nuts, seeds, find the best quality eggs that you can afford right now, fish like tuna or salmon. Canned is great. It's fine. It's much more affordable and it lasts a long time, right? If I buy a tuna fish and I put it in the fridge and I don't cook it in a couple of days, it's going to be bad and I'm going to be real mad at myself. But if I buy a can of tuna fish and keep it in the cupboard, it'll pretty much last until I want to eat it. Walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, and other seeds can help us improve our levels of omega-3s and reduce the inflammation in our body, which again is linked to things like chronic pain, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, and all other chronic diseases. So we want to include foods that have healthy fats in them. Last concept we're going to cover, nutrient density versus energy or calorie density. Again, this highlights the need to eat foods closer to those in nature. So foods fall on a spectrum from nutrient dense to energy dense or calorie dense. Nutrient dense foods are those that have a high amount of nutrients, vitamins and minerals, for a low amount of calories. On the opposite end, energy dense foods are those that have a high amount of calories with a low amount of nutrients. And then there's a spectrum in between. So you want more of your foods towards the left end of the spectrum, the low energy dense, high nutrient dense end of the category. Some foods in the middle, because we know our fat foods will have nutrition, but higher calories. And then you want to limit or monitor the foods that are higher in energy, but lower in nutrition. So what falls on the very lowest low end of the nutrient density scale? Vegetables and fruits. So things like carrots, broccoli, peas, greens, berries, etc., you name it, fruit or vegetable, doesn't offer a lot of calories by way of energy, but offers a huge bang for your buck by way of nutrients. So let's look at spinach, or better yet, my favorite green, arugula. If you've never tried it, I highly encourage you to do so. It really jazzes up the greens department. So you're going to get very few calories, almost negligible, probably not even worth counting, and a ton of vitamins, minerals, a little bit of protein. You're going to get a lot from that food. You'll get iron, you'll get calcium, you'll get vitamin C, you'll get all of these things, you'll get fiber. And also, it'll fill up a lot of space. So our nutrient-dense foods are typically larger with less calories, right? So if you ate a huge whole bowl of greens with vegetables in it, and you added some other stuff to make it taste yummy, you would fill up a lot of space in your belly, which actually will make you full sooner. So not only can it help balance the total amount of calories that you eat in a day, but it'll give you more nutrition bang for your buck. On the opposite end, if you're eating things like lots of packaged and processed food, let's see, like fast food sandwiches, frappuccinos, bobas and desserts and pastries, things like that, those are going to be higher in calories per unit, per amount of food, and lower in nutrition. Again, that's not to say that you should never eat these foods. That's silly and unrealistic. It's just to say that they're typically not going to keep you full very long, not going to balance your blood sugar very well, and offer you a lot of calories for a smaller amount of food. So you can see this picture here comparing a meal with a frappuccino and a breakfast sandwich and a pastry to a full day's worth of eating, with the idea being that these are about the same amount of calories. So you get eggs and fruits and vegetables and lean meats and soup and chocolate in the one on the right and one meal in the one on the left. So generally speaking, these packaged and processed foods that you can get that are pretty convenient are going to have a lot more calories, which we do need some of, but a lot less nutrition again. So we're getting fewer vitamins and minerals. Our metabolic systems aren't functioning as well. We're not getting as much fiber or other nutrients to stabilize our blood sugar. We're not getting as much protein for repair of tissues. We're hungrier a lot sooner. Our energy is swinging wildly throughout the day, and we need more calories to stay full and satisfied. So what can you do with this information? I'm not saying don't ever go to Starbucks or McDonald's again. I'm saying think about what you can add. Can you add more vegetables into your meals or snacks? Do you maybe enjoy apples and peanut butter, or apples and cheese, or carrots and dip? Can you maybe add a side salad to your lunch or your dinner? Instead of getting a sandwich on break at work, can you get a salad with the same things on it, right? So other things to consider, or maybe do half of the sandwich with a salad, right? So it's finding ways to add these nutrient-dense foods that you enjoy and can live with forever. All righty. So that is the end. There we go. That is the end. Wasn't letting me get to this page. So here's the end of our initial nutrition fundamentals lecture. Takeaways here. Eating well encompasses quite a wide variety of eating styles and strategies with some basic fundamentals in mind. So you might eat meat, you might not. You might eat paleo, you might not. You might do intermittent fasting, you might not. You might eat a Mediterranean diet or the diet of the culture from the country of which you came. And all of those things are wonderful. It's all okay, and all of those things can incorporate sound nutrition principles. So a few of those principles are: calorie balance over time matters. So if you're constantly eating more than you need, it's not going to be great for your well-being, and it can lead to weight gain, or it will lead to weight gain over time. Nutrient-dense foods help with that. So again, on the nutrient-dense end of the spectrum, vegetables and fruits. In the middle, we find our grains, our lean proteins. Also kind of in the middle towards the other end, we find our foods that are nutrient dense, but also rich in fats and calories, like eggs and dairy products and oils. And then all the way to the far right of the spectrum, we see our packaged and processed fast food, cakes, cookies, donuts, pastries, chips, etc. We want to be eating towards the left end of the spectrum, the nutrient dense end and the middle of the spectrum, as much as possible, while sprinkling in an enjoyable amount of the far right foods too, and noticing how we feel. You'll probably find that your energy levels are more balanced and you feel better over time. And generally speaking, we want to eat foods that are closest to their form that are found in nature as possible. from our carbohydrate, protein, and fat groups. We'll look more as we move forward, not just at what we eat, but at how and why. So we'll cover the research behind dieting, asking the question, do diets actually work? Spoiler alert, they do not. We'll look at some other strategies that you can do instead. Things like mindful eating, intuitive eating, curating the right environment, and practical steps to incorporate a wide variety of nutritious foods that balance your blood sugar, your hunger, and your health. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this first lecture on nutrition, and I'm looking forward to diving into the rest of them with you soon.